Thank you very much. Welcome back to the House Committee on General and Housing. And we had this morning a joint hearing with the Senate on where the administration presented their housing proposal. That proposal is not yet formally a bill, but we determined that it was time since it had been prepared. It was good. It was timely for us to hear from them. At this point, we're just going to devote a little preliminary time for committee members to comment on what they thought about it. So why don't you start?
Me?
And I think format
No
for
problem,
this,
okay.
you can say whatever you think. I just think it's good for us to begin.
Sure, well, yeah, I appreciated, again, this is my second term, so this is kind of a different style than the bill last year, that was presented. I am still digesting a lot of what we heard. It was a lot of information, and I'm gonna take the next couple of days to really dive deeper in on my own time, but I agree with a lot that was in there, and they touched on a lot of points that I think we've been hearing both from constituents and people across the state, that there are some changes and additions that can be made often when, I don't tell this group, that when we have laws, acts play out, there's often gaps that we find after they've been implemented. And so it really touched on a lot of the things that I'd been hearing from folks. I am in Chittenden County, so a lot of as we discussed, some of the stuff really assisted. And I think Senator Clarkson, touched on, we have made progress in a lot of the exemptions and seeing where that lies. I obviously love the data section and the directive to continue working on that. But so yeah, I'm coming away with a positive feeling about what was presented to us today, and I thought it was thoughtful, and there's a lot of good in there, and I just have to kind of take some time to look into those details, and then I'm hoping it will give us a good picture of when we start really diving into what we're gonna focus on, where we can pick up from there. So I am grateful for the presentation. That's kind of what I'm feeling right now, but I can't, right now I'm not like, I hate this, I hate that, I love this, I love that. So that's where I'm at.
I concur with what Representative Krasnow has said. I've been on this committee, this is my 9th year, so housing. And housing has always been an issue for years. COVID just blew it out of the water. It's just such a problem. And everything depends on housing. People can't take jobs here and come here because there's no housing. I can't tell you the number of calls I get from professional people that we've hired this veterinarian, we've hired this teacher. Do you know of any apartments available? It is today's presentation. I'm grateful for it. I think there is a lot of information to digest. But I also feel that it's been a number of years that we've had this problem. And it's good to see that the governor has a plan, but how long is this plan going to take? And what happens in the meantime to all these people who are, unhoused? They are human beings. They're not all bad people. There are a ton of children. And that absolutely breaks my heart because children should not be living in motels. So I would like to see things move much more quickly. But I'm willing to listen to all of the options and go from there.
So I'm really new to all of this. I have a couple of questions. When they're talking about the appeal process, what exactly is the appeal process? Is it the same as when you have a home and you get the permit and then it's 15 days and then somebody can appeal?
There's two processes. I didn't even fully understand this before, and I'm not certain I fully understand it now. If a project, how a project is approved by the local town, it could be approved by a zoning administrator, it could be approved by the select board, it could be approved, it's whatever it is. There are, I believe, an abutter, someone who lives adjacent to the project can appeal it. But there's also a process by which, under the Act 181, as it was approved last year, any 10 people, or is it 20? It's
10 and a whole, yeah.
It's 20. Any 20 people can appeal,
10 people.
even if they aren't abutters, but you have to get 20 people together.
Mhm.
And it would be appealed, it could be appealed if it's an act, depending on the permit, if it's an Act 250 permit, it goes to the Land Use Review Board or the Environmental Court, excuse me. If it's a building permit or a zoning permit, you'd have to go to court. And the concern is that's been expressed is that a single person in the past, a single person can decide they don't like a property and appeal all the way up to the Supreme Court and back. And that's
So one single person, they wouldn't need to get those other
they
19.
would under the law as it is now, it couldn't be an individual.
Okay.
And as we also heard too from folks that have testified in their introductions to us around housing is one of the biggest problems with the appeals process is obviously how long it takes. So someone might, a developer or another person who's working on an important housing project might be like, I'm canning this. This has taken way too long. Every minute that something is stalled, the costs we've heard last year and now are just rising, and it's just not worth it to those folks. So addressing the appeals process, which I believe we've heard from a number of witnesses, was an important thing that we really need to look at this year because that is causing harm to the projects that need to get off the ground.
Well, my second question is when they speak about sewer, do they also mean septic? Just sewer?
Yeah, in other words, there's one under Act 250 as it was amended last year. There's one set of regulations that apply to areas that are served by water and sewer. And then there's another set, then there's certain areas that still have exemptions allowed if they're served by, if they have, quote, suitable soils. And I presume suitable soils means for septic. What I don't really know very much about is group septic. There are towns that have either tried to or in some cases succeeded in putting in group septic. But for example, in the town of East Calais or the village of East Calais, where I live, it's mapped as a village area or whatever the designation is, and you can have up to 50 units because if the soils are suitable and
Right.
there's no sewer.
Right.
So, and in fact, the reality is for much of rural Vermont, there's not only isn't there water and sewer, but there isn't gonna be water and sewer for a long time,
Mhm.
Forever.
forever.
And,
Yeah.
and that kind of ties into what they talked about investment in infrastructure, which was one of the goals of the administration, I believe, which was being able to put more investments in infrastructure so that they could encourage places that don't to be able to get money to do such a thing.
As far as sewer or septic capacity?
Sewer.
Because one's got sewer, isn't one a lot less expensive than the other?
Not really, depend, I mean, the infrastructure to extend sewer lines and water lines is very expensive. Very expensive. But large scale, if you're gonna do a 50 unit, the amount of land and the quality of that land to absorb that much. Because it's done by bedroom, like how many bedrooms you have per unit.
Okay.
It's a big plot of land to create a septic that can take a 50 unit building. That's a big
I
chunk.
think, but I'm assuming that in a rural area where that would be the consideration,
happen.
it's not gonna be a 50
No.
units, it might be 5.
Mhm.
And that would be, I don't know, it would be interesting to ask a septic engineer, so how long would that, it depends a lot on the soils themselves. But
And also, those are the only two options.
That's it.
yeah, for.
So sewer's out.
That's about it, it's sewer.
You can have,
Can't-
you can have special composting toilets, but
Yeah.
I don't think that's
That's,
gonna happen.
Mhm.
But some Vermont Law School has composting toilets and they work fine.
yeah.
Of course, there's no more bye-bye, but, yes,
In my house in Rutland Town, we were one house away from the sewer connection that served the veterinarian's business. But we all had a septic system, which had to be pumped out once a year. And we all had central well for water. And when the owner of the central well decided to go out of business, we all had to dig our own well.
Mm.
We couldn't form, for some reason, we couldn't form what they call a fire district.
Mhm.
So we had to dig a well.
Yeah, that's how I grew up too.
and you also have, there are towns, for example, in my area, East Callis and Plainfield have water districts. They don't have sewer, but they have water districts. These water districts, and you'd think, oh, wow, water, they have water. They are usually tiny, underfunded, run by volunteers or close to volunteers. And they have very little capability of complying with A&R requirements. And they often don't have the capacity to add any additional housing without, it would just take a lot of money to expand.
Newberry as well.
Newberry,
The village has water, no sewer.
did you have other questions or thoughts? Well, let me ask you a question, and I'm asking it of everybody. One of the things that I've hoped that we could do here, and I've tried to do it with some of my questions, is get everybody up to speed on things that they, there's different levels of prior knowledge about things. And I'm wondering, are we doing okay that way, or are people still pretty mystified?
No, seems to work.
Well,
I feel like I can tell.
if I am mystified, everyone else will have to tell me. I think,
For
I
example,
think it's congealing.
do people understand when we talk about tips? Do people understand tax increment financing?
Well, I do now because
Very
I
basic.
asked you about it a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an area that I've heard from folks in the building, that as we continue to discuss it and work through that may be an educational opportunity for folks in here to educate others out in the building, because there is a lot of misinformation around or just misunderstanding about TIFs. And so I think that that's something to flag, that we as a group can really educate our colleagues about that as we continue to discuss it. I think will be important, because it is very confusing to people.
What do you think, Tom?
Of this morning's presentation, I think between the housing bill and the priorities in the budget, there are a lot of things that are well addressed, and there's probably some details of it. It does as much to take some things off our plate as it does to say, okay, here are the things that we need to look at because they're just not part of this. You know, they're landlord tenant stuff, for example. Did you, and I'm not sure that I caught this, but just picking up on where you left off, are the budget proposals that have come from the governor's office, do they adequately cover the everyday crisis of people not being, you know, a roof and shelter sufficiently to buy the time to get to where we want to be? So are we addressing the lag time? And it's easy to say, let's go build a housing unit. That can be, you know, if you're sleeping in your car, that takes a long time. So in the meantime, I'm just curious to know, are we adequately addressing that while we're moving to the solution? I think we have to address some of the root causes. I mean, there is a solution in the permanently affordable housing is some of the routes to home ownership that have been described, which I think are fantastic. Some of the root causes of the crisis, this dynamic with long-term rentals, the landlord-tenant relations that are very complicated and driving landowners into short-term rentals, the drug crisis. I mean, these are all things that are feeding it's just lack of housing and people not wanting to rent out. So those are, you know, side things that aren't necessarily part of this bill that we should probably, I would want to take.
It's just a comment on that. I'm not addressing so much as the substance of what you're saying, which is all of these huge social forces that are impacting the housing problem. Generally speaking, roughly speaking, Human Services Committee deals with the motel program. And to some extent, the shelter program as well. Then we deal with that housing and what happens when they leave the motel program. Not so much the services they need, what we call wraparound services, but literally the physical things. Right now, there has been testimony to put in the BAA $1.9 million in order to cover people who are in the motel program until June 30th, I think. Whereas without that money, they'd be out as of March 30th, I think. And I think the feeling is that's actually for a rather small amount of money, pretty good investment to keep people from being thrown out of the street in the mud season. However, I think everybody is concerned that the motel program is just feeding it's how did the governor put it? Feeding the problem rather than the solution. In other words, it's the humane thing to do, but it's incredibly expensive And so the question, and what you're dealing with is a very diverse population. Some of the people there are people who have drug problems. Some of them are elderly. Some of them are elderly and have major medical problems.
And mental health, there's mental health.
Yeah, mental health,
To
big
this.
mental health problems, and which, of course, has its origins decades ago in the deinstitutionalization program. Oh, we would take care of this at the community level, but we don't. So and some of them are families with kids.
Hmm.
You know, so it's this very diverse group that's very difficult you can't plan for with one housing solution.
Mhm.
I do think you're on to something, both of you, in that the idea of trying to come up with efficient ways of expanding options that are outside of motel program is really a good idea. One of those is the VIA program. In that there are two VIA programs. One's 5 years of affordability, and one is 10 years of affordability. The 5-year one, at least, you have to take people out of homelessness to qualify for that. And we heard testimony that it is working pretty well. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying you're right. Yes.
But it's wraparound services that you're talking about. If you put people in a hotel and you don't have those wraparound services, all you're doing is creating a revolving door. Because if you don't get to the crux of how did they wind up homeless to begin with? And typically, and I've worked with homeless, there's a mental health / substance abuse issue. There's domestic violence. There's so many things. It's like everything is intertwined.
Yeah, and if you just provide housing and nothing else, it doesn't.
It's a Band-Aid.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, it produces sometimes terrible housing.
Yeah.
And if I can just add to, but if I may, for me, one of the frustrations, though, the last couple of years is that there hasn't been a transition plan that is acceptable. Because my morals and values, I am not comfortable as a policymaker with a seat at the table, just saying, well, you're out. So while these programs are costly and ineffective in many ways, at this moment in time, it will be another Band-Aid, that is true. And so hopefully, I mean, in my heart of hearts, knowing that with the work that we're going to do for housing solutions, that we are seeing working, that it will eventually get there. But at this moment in time, I'm not comfortable. Again, this isn't in our jurisdiction, but I'm not comfortable just being like, see you later until we're ready to get things online. We have to continue to provide a bridge for people to exit homelessness, in my opinion.
There was a plan. One of the issues that people have been disagreeing about is there was a plan to, the administration was asked to prepare a plan to deal with this problem and did not. There was a legislative plan produced by the Champlain Housing Trust, which would have provided housing, permanent housing for the entire unhoused population in 10 years. It was very expensive. It's not as if it couldn't be dealt with. And we will, of course, deal with it every year of a big fight over motel rooms. Joe, what did you think?
I'll make this short and sweet. I would have left, but that would have kind of messed up our quorum. So hopefully somebody gets back soon. So here's mine. Mine would be the wetlands. I'm not a big fan of moving in on wetlands,
Doing what?
moving in on wetlands any more than we already do. The road rule, I think, was ridiculous to begin with.
Okay.
Glad that's gone in this proposal. The Spark project, or Spark, basically project-based TIF for smaller towns. Is just that for smaller towns. I don't think it's a rural program at all, in my view of rural. I don't see towns taking on something like that for the scale of projects that rural towns do.
Like 4 units.
Right.
Yeah, nobody's doing a TIF district for tearing down an old junk building and putting up a duplex.
Right, and they could be all battling over.
One thing that was brought up in our thing was, how it's really a ground up for the mapping. We're using the town's maps and doing it that way. Just want to, for clarity, I know I certainly felt it during our process. I would imagine there's other towns that do as well. Creating those maps that we're saying we're now building from the ground up, creating those maps is a bit of a top-down process to where you kind of get to decide what your town wants. But if it's not going to be approved by the Regional Planning Commission, well, then you're not going to do it. So you kind of are funneled into a certain, here's what you can do for your town map. So I think that's kind of I don't want to say disingenuous, but like,
Ground up with permission.
yeah, using those maps isn't necessarily ground up because creating them was kind of top down. What else?
The town doesn't have the expertise.
No, it's the town says, I would like to do this, and the Regional Planning Commission saying, well, at the state level, they're saying that they don't want to see that type of sprawl or that type of this or that type of, so we're not going to approve your map if you do that. Which then you don't qualify for grants and this and that.
And you only have 1 seat on the board of the,
Exactly.
there's no dynamic where all the towns just shake hands and say, well, you scratch my back off.
Yeah, no.
In an ideal world.
Something you had brought up with the interim exemption going far out, and then when the plans are actually set. I was just kind of curious, like how far into the building to the process would you have to be when the plans are finalized?
I
It's a weird-
admit to
it's a
it,
weird
it's
one.
weird because we've had testimony here. Remember, I think we've all asked Peter and others, look, are you gonna make 26? And they all say, yeah. I mean, that was my.
Yeah.
Why exactly you go out, what is it, to 2035?
Yeah.
With something that's gonna be done in a couple of years isn't clear to me, but, okay.
Wow.
And my last one would be, before I leave, is I would like to see more money. I think something that is great for really small towns, brownfield cleanup. I think how we define that is really good. And open, expansive, can be used for a lot of good things in small towns. 2 million is really, really low on that because $1 million of it is just to test with. Or that's what it's up to, I guess, kind of thing.
Really long times.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not bad, it's just some lead remediation and asbestos cleanup and this and that, it's not anything crazy. But having the actual funds to remediate that type of stuff, I think would be excellent for small towns to get derelicts, insufficient buildings torn down, ready for development. Because that's much more appealing to somebody, whether it's a single family, duplex, 4 units, a nice grassy lot is a lot better than half an acre of garbage everywhere.
Did you have to go?
Yeah, right.
So we still have a quorum, so we're gonna.
Thank you.
It's just because he left, everyone else is nailed to their seats.
Oh, sorry.
I just asked,
Just to
what are
follow
your
up,
thoughts?
yeah, thank you. Well, just to follow up on his point, which, was that 2 million again, like a way, like when we looked at the infrastructure was only 9.1 million and they were like, well, this is really more to be able to leverage federal monies that, if you're putting in money that has other conditions, you wouldn't be able to leverage the federal grant money. Is it the same thing for the brownfield cleanup amount? is it again just sort of special money that now has the ability
I
to
don't
be
know.
multiplied?
We'll have to know.
Like that, okay.
And I don't see any, I didn't hear any regulatory reform
Brownfield.
on brownfields. In other words, the complaint that it takes too long and we'll have to get to the bottom.
Mhm.
What else? Anything else?
You know, transit. I think we need more details on what they're, um. It doesn't strike me that, like, they're kind of saying where there is transit, we will build. But there's no vision of where transit makes sense, we're gonna keep investing in transit and it's gonna lead to. Being able to skip steps or, make the appeals process or et cetera, et cetera. And I think that we are going to, right now, when we're facing a huge shift in how we provide transit and who runs what, we're gonna see a lot of cuts in these areas that we're using exemptions based on transit, and that's gonna mess up it's really already scaring our planning in our planning commissions and our, DRBs and whatnot in our towns. Certainly Essex is really nervous about losing the transit, which they've been planning their development around.
South Burlington as well.
I think it's safe to say that their plan does not really address the transit issue.
Right.
I mean, it extends certain boundaries. But it doesn't address the underlying issue that you're concerned about, which is lack of funding and closing down routes, et cetera.
Right, so they're using it as like, this can be another reason why we can build if you have transit. I guess I'm just asking that we try to better coordinate. If you're gonna build a housing plan, that, there's more coordination around transit. Especially for affordable housing, multi-unit dwelling with less parking.
I agree that the more and more I'm here and serving and learning, I think that I would like to see a plan and acknowledgement that of what we're talking about, that if we continue to build, especially affordable housing, and we've said this already again, that they do prioritize that, because also where I live, when we're facing cuts in my district, which is a lot of affordable housing in South Burlington, people moved there and are continuing to build these projects. But if the bus lines go, that leaves people without a job, a way to get to work, a way to get to the doctor, a way to get to the store. And so it's concerning. So I would like to see the administration prioritize that conversation and, have a budget that reflects those values as well.
I guess I have pretty complicated feelings about the proposal. I feel like it needs a lot of work by us. I think there's a lot of good things in here, particularly on the financial side. As a general matter, think that I'm skeptical whether I think it's worth looking at regulatory reform and appeals and all of that. I'm a little skeptical about how much effect it's going to have when the real issue is money. The real issue is there's just not enough money. The gap between what people can afford and what it costs to build a house today is just there. The math is there. And we've heard it again and again, all these projects that are shown to us, one of the major funders is VHCV. And VHCV, we have to find a way to get them more money. And then this is going to be doubly difficult if the federal government gets out of that area. I'm not saying we shouldn't work on all these other areas. I just think it's nibbling around the edges. The real issue is money. I understand that people don't like the roadless rule and et cetera. I think that there is a reluctance here to immediately reopen a grand bargain that was reached last year. It was not done lightly in the sense that it was very, very difficult to get the development community and the environmental community to agree. And I think, I certainly understand the concern that you, Tom, articulated, that there are landowners in tier 3 who are really worried. And, I hear that. I'm just saying, as a political matter, I think that might be difficult. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas in here, and also I think there are going to be a lot of interesting ideas that we're going to independently come up with that are worth looking at from the testimony that we received and will receive. I think one of the things we want to do is ask people like the nonprofit funders and others, what isn't in here that you would like to see? One area, I'll give you an example of an area that really interests me. In much of the country, when somebody's proposing a development and the development has infrastructure in it that benefits the development, one of the ways you finance it is not tax increment financing, it's just a special assessment district where you draw a line around a district, and let's say it's to build a park that's just going to, and a playground that's just going to benefit this development. And then you just you assess taxes. The taxes goes up for those property owners in an amount necessary to pay off the bonds that built the park. And in many states, if you want to create an assessment district, you either need an affirmative vote of the people who are going to be taxed, or you don't need any vote. Like, I believe in California, it's simply the city council can just create the assessment district. And then there's a chance for the property owners to protest. And if they protest, then the city council can override the protest, but only by a 4/5 vote. It depends on the state. Vermont, the weird thing, at least I find it weird in Vermont, is the whole town has to vote to approve the assessment district, even though it's just assessing one piece of property. And that's weird for two reasons. It means the town the town select board might impose an assessment on a piece of property that doesn't want it. But the rest of the residents say, well, it's no skin off my nose, I'm not paying the taxes. Only they're paying the tax. Or it could go the other way, which has happened in Vermont, where a developer wanted to, let's say, I think there was a special assessment for septic, a large septic proposal, but some people in the town were opposed to the whole development, and so they used this vote as leverage to turn it down. So I'm very interested in seeing, how we've talked about project-specific TIFs. I'm very interested to see if we could change the vote requirement so that the only vote that's required is the property owner that's subject to the tax. And that's another financing device. And we're going to have Michael Goen, who is the bond bank guy, runs the bond bank. We'll have him in and he'll talk about that. So anyway, I think that we have work to do.
I agree. Now that I went first, I thought. No, I also would like,
You're listening to everybody.
right, yeah, absolutely. I also would like, to hear, and we will continue with testimony, but I would like to hear from some more developers who are really the boots on the ground, folks who are experiencing some of these issues and talking about, like we were saying, like how to make these this work, because that's some of the, what do you need? And I do get lists of their wish lists, right, from ones that are in my community. And there are some things that were absent from the proposal that I've kind of made a list of. So I would like to hear from some different developers who are experiencing what it's like to meet those goals of getting things online. I think would be helpful in our committee's work to get some of those folks in as well. I do recognize that some of the things will be contentious of the grand plans and the work that went into, you know, Senator Clarkson expressed, who is, you know, it took a lot of different folks at the table in that working group to get to some agreements, but we also have, I'm not pushing back completely, but we have a different body in the building now and different you know, set of goals sometimes. And so while I am conflict curious person, I know not everyone is, but it is some, I know it's fine. But I am interested in having those discussions at least to just kind of open it up to the new makeup of the legislature and others, but I do recognize that it will be contentious.
I'll tell you what, it is 2:00. Why don't we go offline? And we will, Tom, I see you're there,
Who's over there?
but I think, there he is, I was looking at Tom.
It's both places. Yeah.
But I think we should take a break and I like to keep to the schedule just because people rely on that and whoever's out there in the ether that wants to hear you, I don't want you to testify now and be done by the time they check in. Plus, it'll give us all a little break. So if it's all right with you, let's go offline and come back at 2:15, right? 2:30.
We had said 2:30.
So it's half an hour. The thing is, don't be late.
Right.
Because we have to leave. I mean, Molly will start sticking her head in the door
Oh,
and
yeah.
coming after us.
Can we do 2:15?
We could,
I think we should do
Yeah.
2:15 by the time we get intros and.
Yeah, all right, 2:15.